The call arrived at 8:14 on a Thursday morning, and I was already at my desk when my phone lit up with my brother Derek's name. I let it go to voicemail. He called again 4 minutes later. I picked up on the third ring. "Mom wants you to come out this weekend," he said. "She's got some paperwork she wants to go over." I asked him what kind of paperwork. "Just some property stuff," he said. "You know how she gets. She wants everyone together." I told him I'd drive out Saturday. He said that worked. He hung up before I could ask anything else, and I sat there for a moment with the phone still in my hand, looking at the window across my office where the elm tree in the parking lot had just started to turn. I was 34 years old. I had worked as a senior loan processor at Heartland Cooperative Lending in Duluth for 9 years, and I understood property documents the way other people understood weather, not as events but as systems, with their own internal logic and their own ways of failing. I knew what a quitclaim deed looked like. I knew what a title amendment looked like. I knew, before I ever sat down at my mother's kitchen table that Saturday, that paperwork about property was never just paperwork about property. I drove the 2 hours from Duluth to Brandt Falls on Saturday morning, past the lake and the grain elevators and the long flat stretches of highway that always made me feel like I was driving back into something I had already decided to leave. The house was a white 2-story on Kellner Road that my parents had bought in 1987, the year before I was born. My father had died 6 years ago. Since then, the house had been my mother's, and so had the 40-acre parcel behind it that had been in the Voss family since my grandfather broke ground on it in 1961. My mother, Carol Voss, was standing at the kitchen counter when I came in. She was 68 years old and had the particular quality of women who have always been the center of a room without ever seeming to try. She poured coffee without asking if I wanted any and set it in front of me at the table. Derek was already there, leaning against the doorframe between the kitchen and the hallway. He was 31. He still lived 20 minutes away, in the same town where he had gone to high school, and he had the easy comfort of someone who had never had to learn how to be far from home. "Good drive?" my mother asked.
"Fine," I said.
Roads were clear. She nodded and sat down across from me. There was a manila envelope on the table between us, the kind with the metal clasp, already open. She reached in and pulled out a set of pages and slid them across to me without looking up. "I had Renner draw these up," she said. Renner was Gerald Renner, the family's attorney in Brandt Falls, who had handled my father's estate and who my mother had known for 30 years. It was cleaner this way. I picked up the pages. I read every line. It was a title amendment. The 40-acre parcel behind the house, the Voss land, the land my grandfather had broken ground on, the land my father had walked every spring, had been retitled. My mother's name remained. Derek's name had been added. Mine was not there. Derek had been the one who stayed, who showed up in person, who made himself visible in the ways that property decisions reward. That was the logic of it. I understood the logic of it, and I set the pages back down flat on the table. Derek shifted in the doorway. My mother picked up her coffee cup. I didn't ask a single question that night. "My name is Maren Voss. I grew up on Kellner Road and left for Duluth at 22 with a business degree from the University of Minnesota Duluth and a job offer I had worked 2 years to earn. I was not the kind of person my family talked about when they talked about leaving. I was the kind of person they talked about when they needed something explained. My father had understood that. He was a quiet man who expressed respect the way most people express weather, indirectly, through what he paid attention to. He used to call me on Sunday afternoons and ask about work, and he actually listened to the answers. He asked specific questions about the closing process, about what underwriters looked for, about how a title could get clouded without anyone noticing until it was too late. He wasn't asking to be polite. He was asking because it interested him, because the land had been his life's work and he wanted to know every way it could be protected. He used to say that the people who understood how a system worked were the people who kept it from failing, and that most families lost land not because of bad intentions but because nobody had bothered to learn the paperwork in time. He said this once at the kitchen table when I was home from school for winter break, and Derek had been there and had not said anything, and my father had looked at me when he said it in the way he had of addressing his words toward the person he meant them for. When he got sick, he called me first, before Derek, before anyone. He told me where the insurance documents were. He told me what the land was worth and what he wanted done with it, and he said, with the particular plainness of men who know they are running out of time, "You'll know what to do." He died on a February morning 6 years ago in the hospital in Brandt Falls, and I drove the 2 hours alone and sat with my mother and Derek through the arrangements, and when it was over I drove back to Duluth and went to work the following Monday because there was nothing else to do with grief except outlast it. The week after he died, I had gone through his desk in the study while my mother slept and Derek watched television in the living room. It was what I did when there was something to organize. I organized it. I found the insurance binder he had told me about. I found the deed abstracts going back to 1961. I found an envelope with my name on the front in my father's handwriting, and I put it in my bag without opening it there because the study felt too close and the house felt too loud even with everyone quiet inside it, and I drove back to Duluth and opened it at my own kitchen table. 5 words. His handwriting, careful and slightly slanted the way it always was. I put the note back in its envelope and put it in the accordion folder I kept in the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. I did not tell anyone about it. My mother had never been cruel to me in the way that some mothers are cruel, with sharp words or cold silences. She was cruel the way a current is cruel, not with intention but with consistency, always moving in one direction, and that direction was Derek. Derek, who had stayed. Derek, who called every Sunday. Derek, who had married a local girl and bought a house 10 minutes away and produced 2 grandchildren who climbed on my mother's porch furniture. I had done other things. The things I had done did not show up in my mother's accounting of the family the same way. I had understood this for a long time. What I had not done was assume it would be committed to paper. The Voss land was worth approximately $340,000 at current agricultural rates, based on my own knowledge of the comparable parcels in that county. I knew this because knowing it was part of my job, and my job was something I was good at. I kept that number to myself on the drive back to Duluth on Saturday evening. I kept the whole thing to myself, the pages and the metal clasp envelope and my mother's voice saying it was cleaner this way. I let it sit there. 7 months before the Saturday at the kitchen table, I had driven to Brandt Falls on a Wednesday evening after my mother called to say that the furnace in the house had failed and the repair estimate was $4,200 and she wasn't sure what to do. Derek had looked at it, she said, but he didn't think it was something he could handle himself. I arrived at 6 in the evening. The house was cold, the kind of cold that settles into walls and makes them feel temporary. My mother had the oven on with the door open, which was something my grandmother used to do, and which I had asked her not to do for years. I called the furnace company from the kitchen table, the same one she'd been using since the 90s, and spoke to a man named Ted Carlson who had gone to high school with my father. I told him what the estimate said and asked him to walk me through the itemized labor costs. The part itself is $800, he said. The rest is labor and the emergency call fee. I asked him if he could come out Thursday morning instead of treating it as an emergency. He said he could. I asked him what the Thursday morning rate looked like. He gave me a number that was $900 lower than the estimate. I scheduled it. I paid the $3,300 over the phone with my own card and told Ted Carlson to send the receipt to my email. My mother was standing at the counter when I hung up. "All set," I said. "Ted's coming Thursday morning, 8 o'clock. It'll be warm by Thursday afternoon." She nodded. "Derek was going to look into it more," she said. "It's handled," I said. She poured me a cup of coffee. She didn't say thank you exactly, but she stood there for a moment in the kitchen in the cold house with the oven door open, and she looked at me with something I didn't have a word for, and then she turned back to the counter. I drove back to Duluth later that night and was at my desk by 8 the next morning. The house had been 42 degrees when I first arrived, and the furnace company would have it to 68 by Thursday evening. I had confirmed that before I left. I sent Ted Carlson a follow-up email confirming the Thursday appointment and asked him to copy me on the completion report so I'd have it for my records. He sent it Friday afternoon. I filed it in the accordion folder under the year and the address and the date. 3 months after the furnace, in January, Derek called me on a Tuesday to tell me that the back fence line on the Voss parcel had a survey dispute with a neighbor to the east, a man named Halvorsen who had bought the adjacent 40 acres 2 years earlier and was now claiming that the eastern boundary marker was 12 feet inside what he said was his property. "Mom's kind of panicked," Derek said. She doesn't know what to do. I told him I'd make some calls. I knew a land surveyor in Duluth named Paul Eckberg who had done boundary work in that county before. I called Paul the same day and explained the situation. He said he could pull the original 1961 plat map and the subsequent survey records and give me an opinion before anything went to a formal dispute. I drove to Brandt Falls on a Saturday in February with Paul's written assessment in my bag. We sat at my mother's kitchen table, my mother, Derek, and me, and I walked them through the plat map and the survey history. The 1961 boundary was clear. Halvorson's claim didn't hold. So we're okay? My mother asked. You're okay, I said. Paul's putting together a letter for Renner. Once Renner sends it, Halvorson will drop it. Derek leaned back in his chair. I figured it was probably nothing, he said. I did not point out that he had been the one who called me with the word panicked. I looked at the plat map on the table and straightened the edge of it against the table's corner. It's handled, I said. I paid Paul Eckberg's assessment fee out of my own account, $575. I did not mention it. My mother made sandwiches, and we ate them at the same table where the plat map was spread out and nobody talked about the land at all. The wound scene happened 4 weeks after the Saturday with the title amendment, on a Sunday in October, at my mother's house. She had called it a family lunch, which meant her and Derek's wife Shauna and their 2 kids and me. I drove out in the morning and arrived at 11, and the house had the particular smell of pot roast that my mother made every fall, the same recipe since I was a child, and I stood in the doorway of the kitchen for a moment before I came all the way in. We ate at the dining room table. The kids were loud in the good way that children are loud, and Shauna talked about her sister's new house in Eau Claire, and my mother kept getting up to refill things. It felt, on the surface, like every other Sunday lunch at that table. It was after the kids went to watch television in the other room, and Shauna went to help them that it happened. It was just the 3 of us, my mother, Derek, and me, and the table with the remains of lunch on it, and the afternoon light coming through the window over the backyard. Derek poured himself more coffee. He leaned back in his chair. So I was talking to Renner last week, he said, about some improvements to the back parcel. Drainage work, mostly. Maybe a lane put in from the road. My mother nodded. It would help the value, she said. It would, Derek said. He looked at me. You know anything about drainage assessments? For agricultural land? I did. I knew quite a lot about them. I told him the basic framework, county permit requirements, cost per linear foot for tile drainage at current contractor rates in that part of Minnesota. He nodded like he was absorbing information. Then he said, Mom, you know what would actually be good? If someone like Maren were managing all of this, the property stuff. He said it lightly, the way you say something you've already decided. She's good at the paperwork side. My mother looked at me. You've always been good at the practical things, she said. That's your thing. I looked at the table. It's not really her land, though, Derek said. He wasn't being cruel the way that needs a raised voice. He was being the other kind, offhand, like he was stating a fact about weather. I mean, she's not on the title, so it would be more like helping out. He smiled at the word, which she's always been happy to do. My mother looked at her coffee cup. I picked up my water glass and drank from it and set it back down on the table with both hands. There was a manila envelope on the sideboard behind my mother, the same kind with the metal clasp. It had been there since I arrived. I had noticed it when I came in, and I had not said anything about it. I looked at it now, just for a moment, and then I looked back at my water glass. The afternoon light moved across the table. Derek started talking about the drainage lane again. What kind of contractor he'd need, whether the county would want a permit filed before winter, how long the lane itself would take to grade. My mother asked questions. She asked whether it would affect the eastern fence line, whether Halvorson might have a claim to any easement over the new lane. Derek said he didn't think so. He said he'd ask Renner. I sat there with my hands around my water glass and listened to them plan improvements to land that used to have my name on it. The eastern fence line is already documented, I said. They both looked at me. Paul Eckberg's assessment. The boundary is recorded. There's no easement issue with the eastern line. Derek nodded slowly. Right, he said. Good to know. My mother looked at her plate. If you're doing the drainage work, I said, you'll want to pull the county tile records from 1961 first. My grandfather put tile in on the northwest quarter. If the new line crosses it, you'll have a drainage conflict. Derek looked at me with an expression I recognized, slightly surprised, like a man who has asked a question and received a more complicated answer than he wanted. I didn't know that, he said. I know, I said. I did not say a word. The following Monday, I went to work and processed 4 loan files and ate lunch at my desk and drove home along the lake road where the light was already going thin by 4 in the afternoon. I did this on Tuesday. I did this on Wednesday. I did not call my mother. I did not call Derek. I went to bed each night with the dining room table still in my mind, the light moving across it, Derek's voice saying it would be more like helping out. On Thursday morning, I opened the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet at home, the one I kept locked, and I took out the accordion folder where I kept my own records. I had been keeping them for 3 years, since the furnace. Not out of strategy. Out of habit, the same habit that made me date every receipt and keep every email confirmation and note the time of every phone call. It was what I did with information. I organized it because disorganized information was how families lost things. I sat at my kitchen table in Duluth and went through the folder. The furnace repair, $3,300, paid February of last year. Receipt from Carlson Heating in Brandt Falls. Paul Ekberg's boundary assessment, $575, paid February of this year. Written assessment included. The title search I had run myself in the spring, when my mother mentioned she thought there might be an old lien on the property from a contractor my father had used in 2003. I had pulled the county records and confirmed there was no lien. No charge for that one, just my time and my access to the title database through work, which I had used on a Saturday morning before anyone else was in the office. I also had the emails. The one where Derek wrote asking me to look into the Halverson situation. The one where my mother wrote asking about the furnace estimate. The one where I sent her the scheduled appointment confirmation and she wrote back a single line. Thanks, hon. I looked at all of it spread on my kitchen table in the thin October morning light. I put everything back in the accordion folder in the order I had found it. I put the folder in my bag. I stood up. I walked to my car. I drove to work. I carried it with me for 5 weeks. I thought about what it meant to do work that counted and not be counted. I thought about the furnace and the plat map and the survey letter and the title database I had searched on a Saturday morning without telling anyone. I thought about the word practical, which my mother had used since I was a child, and which I had always taken as a compliment, and which I now understood to be a category, a kind of sorting, the way you sort tools into a drawer, useful in their place and not otherwise. I thought about the fact that I had understood this for years without naming it, and that naming it now did not change anything about what had happened, only about what I would do with what had happened. That distinction mattered to me. I had always found that making distinctions carefully was the thing that separated people who kept their footing from people who didn't. It was the same thing that made me good at my job. I was going to use it here. The call from the bank came on a Wednesday morning at 9:47.
I was at my desk.
The number was a Brandt Falls area code I didn't recognize, and I almost let it go. Is this Maren Voss? The man's voice was professional and careful. I said it was. This is Dale Ferris, branch manager at First Northern Bank in Brandt Falls. I'm calling about a property matter connected to the Voss parcel on Kellner Road. Your mother listed you as a contact. I apologize if that's not accurate. We're working from some older paperwork. I asked him what the matter was. He paused the way people pause when they're deciding how much to say. There's a refinancing application on the property. Your mother and your brother filed it about 6 weeks ago. The underwriter flagged a gap in the title history, a boundary dispute that apparently came up earlier this year. We need documentation showing resolution before we can move forward. Another pause. The application is on hold until we have it. I looked at my computer screen. I looked at the window with the elm tree outside it. The tree had lost most of its leaves by now, and the branches were bare and specific against the gray sky. I told Dale Ferris I understood. I told him I might have the documentation he was looking for. I told him I'd be in touch. I hung up and sat still for a moment. Then I called my mother. She answered on the second ring. I just got a call from Dale Ferris at First Northern, I said. A beat of silence. He wasn't supposed to call you, she said. He said you listed me as a contact. That was older paperwork, she said. From before. I asked her when she and Derek had filed the refinancing application. Another silence.
A few weeks ago, she said.
We were going to tell you. What did you need the refinance for? She was quiet long enough that I understood she was deciding. Derek wants to do the drainage work, she said finally. And there's some tax debt from last year that needs to be settled. It's not a lot. We just needed to free up some equity. I asked her how much. $83,400, she said. Give or take. I held the phone and looked at the elm tree. The wind moved one of the bare branches. I watched it. Mom, I said. The bank needs the boundary documentation from the Halvorsen dispute. The resolution paperwork. I know, she said. Renner said he sent it. Renner sent a letter. The bank needs Paul Ekberg's written assessment. The surveyor's report. That's what resolved the dispute, and it's what the underwriter is looking for. Silence. Do you have it? She asked. I do, I said. I paid for it. She didn't say anything to that. I'll come Saturday, I said. We can talk about it then. I arrived at the house on Kellner Road at 10 in the morning. My mother was in the kitchen. Derek's truck was in the driveway. He was sitting at the dining room table with his coffee when I came in, and he looked up with the easy expression of someone who expects the situation to resolve itself around him. I set my bag on the table and sat down across from him. My mother stood by the counter. The morning light came through the window over the backyard and landed on the table between us. I took the accordion folder out of my bag and set it on the table. I did not open it yet. Before I give you what the bank needs, I said, I want to go over something. Derek looked at the folder. Maren, we're not trying to make this complicated. I know, I said. I'm not either. I opened the folder. I took out the pages I had organized and laid them on the table in a single flat stack and pushed them across to him. The furnace repair was $3,300, I said. February of last year. The survey assessment was $575. February of this year. There's also the title search I ran in the spring, which I didn't charge for, but I can tell you what the comparable service costs through the county, if that's useful. Derek looked at the pages. He did not pick them up. That's almost $4,000, my mother said from the counter. Her voice was careful. It's $3,875, I said. Not counting my time. Derek sat back. We never asked you to pay for any of that. You asked me to handle it, I said. Handling it meant paying for it. He looked at the stack of papers. Then he looked at me with the expression I had seen at the dining room table a month ago, not hostile, just settled, like a man who has already decided where the walls are. It's not really her land, though, he had said. She's not on the title. I let him look. The work I did on this property, I said, was real work. That was your word, practical. I'm good at the practical things. Maren. The boundary assessment is what saved the title, I said. You know that. He looked at his coffee cup. My mother had not moved from the counter. If we hadn't documented the Halvorsen dispute, I said, the underwriter would have flagged the boundary as unresolved and the refinance would have been denied. That assessment is the reason the application can go forward. I know that because it's my job to know that. Derek looked at the pages again. He looked like a man working out arithmetic he should have done earlier. We're not saying you didn't help, he said. I know what you're not saying, I said. My mother made a small sound from the counter that I did not look up to interpret. I reached into the folder and took out Paul Ekberg's written assessment and the chain of emails and the furnace receipt and set them in a separate stack. I slid them across the table. That's what the bank needs, I said. It's all there. Derek looked at the stack for a long moment. He picked up the assessment page and read the first paragraph and set it back down. My mother had not moved from her position at the counter. The light through the window had shifted while we sat there, moving from the table to the floor, and the kitchen had the particular stillness of a room where something has been said that cannot be unsaid. Maren, Derek said. I'm not. We weren't trying to cut you out. I looked at him. We thought you'd want to stay involved, he said. With the practical things. Because that's what you're good at. I know what you thought, I said. Then I took the handwritten note out of the inside pocket of the folder. I had found it 2 weeks after my father died, in the desk in his study, in an envelope with my name on the front. I had carried it in that folder for 6 years. I set it on the table between us, face up, and I did not explain it. My father's handwriting. 5 words. You already knew. Dad. Derek looked at it. Something moved across his face that I did not have a name for. My mother made a sound that wasn't quite a word. I stood up. The practical things are real things, I said. That was the first. I picked up my bag and settled the strap on my shoulder. I handled everything you asked me to handle, I said. That was the second. I looked at my mother, who was still standing at the counter with her hand on the edge of it. You already knew that, I said. That was the third. I walked to the door. I did not slam it. It closed behind me with a small definite sound of a door that fits its frame properly, which my father had made sure of when he rehung it in 1997, and which I had always noticed when I left. My mother called me on a Tuesday evening 3 weeks later. I was in my kitchen in Duluth making dinner. I let it ring twice before I answered. The bank approved it, she said. The refinancing. Good, I said. A silence. Outside my kitchen window the lake was dark, and the lights on the far shore were small and steady. Renner wants to talk about the title, she said. Derek thinks, she stopped. Start it again. There might be a way to amend it. To add your name back. I stirred what was on the stove. I'd want to see the paperwork before anything is signed, I said. Of course, she said. And I'd want it done through Renner, I said, not just a verbal agreement. The paperwork needs to be right. I know, she said. I should have had it right the first time. I set the spoon down on the counter. Maren, she said. The things you did. The furnace, the survey. I knew what it cost. I know you did, I said. I didn't say so. No, I said. She was quiet. Your father always said the people who actually take care of things don't need to say they're taking care of things. He said you were like that. I looked at the stove. The flame was low and even. He said it to me, she said. Not just to you. Another silence. This one was different from the others. It had something in it that the others hadn't. The note, she said. From your father. I waited. He gave me one too, she said. The same day, I think. Different envelope. She was quiet for a moment. Mine just said, he was proud of both of you. But I could tell he'd already written yours. I stood at the stove and looked at the burner flame. He was right, I said. She said, I know. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Outside the kitchen window, the lake moved the way it always did in November, dark and indifferent, the lights on the far shore holding steady regardless. I've been thinking about what you said, she said, about the tile drainage from 1961, on the northwest quarter. You'd need to pull the county records before you do anything on that parcel, I said. Derek doesn't know where to find them. I do, I said. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, carefully, I know you do. We stayed on the phone for another few minutes and talked about nothing in particular, the weather in Brandt Falls, whether the drainage work would happen before winter. When we said goodbye, her voice had the quality of something that has been set down after being carried a long time. I hung up and finished making dinner and ate it at my kitchen table where the accordion folder was still sitting, the way it had sat there for weeks, the handwritten note back inside it now in its envelope with my name on the front. The land was 40 acres on Kellner Road in a county in northern Minnesota. My grandfather had broken ground on it in 1961, and my father had walked it every spring, and I had spent 3 years and $3,800 and more Saturdays than I had counted keeping it intact and whole. That was the only thing that was true. This story was written and produced by a team using AI-assisted creative tools. All narration and storytelling elements are AI-generated and fully disclosed per platform policy. This story is entirely fictional and made only for entertainment and educational purposes. All names, characters, locations, and events are invented, and any resemblance to real persons or situations is coincidental.